Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Katerji show with me, your host, Katerji. Tonight we are going to talk about Benjamin Netanyahu, his Endgame, what the stakes are, how international pressure is rising against him, these arrest warrants against him and other senior Israeli officials. How is that going to impact Netanyahu's future? And to discuss all of that, we have Anshel Pfeffer, Israel correspondent for The Economist, worked at Haaretz for a very, very long time as well. And I can think of no one better to talk about this subject. He's sometimes referred to as Netanyahu's unofficial biographer. I'm not sure how he feels about that label, but I'd love to ask him now. So without further ado, my guest, Anshel Pfeffer. Welcome to the show, Anshel.
Hi, Oz.
How are you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Oh, my
Okay, how's life in Kiev?
Kiev is sunny at the moment, but it's there's been a bit of a crazy weather, sort of raining here and there. Haven't had any huge drone strikes since that big one the other day, so yeah, things are okay here. So normally at this point in the show, I ask people to introduce themselves, and I'll throw you the curveball question of how do you feel about that label of the unofficial Netanyahu biographer that I've seen attached to you in the media, and like Sky News and places have referred to you as that. So I wondered how you personally think of it.
Well, it's pretty accurate. I wrote a biography about Netanyahu. It appeared in 2018. A couple of years later, there's also an updated edition which was published in the United Kingdom, and it's unofficial because Netanyahu didn't meet with me. Didn't have. I mean, we met a couple of times as part of my job as the Economist correspondent in Israel, but he wouldn't meet for me for the book. He wouldn't give me any interviews. So yeah, I'm a biographer, an unofficial biographer, and I'm not the only one. There are other biographies written by Netanyahu about Netanyahu, also one that he wrote himself, and so I'm fine with that because it's accurate and because I chose to write that book.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's more the unofficial part. It's sort of implied by that it wasn't approved of by Netanyahu. Has he read the book? Do you know whether he read it or not?
Oh, about the unofficial, and there are a lot of people who write biographies of people, and even if they're not the official biographer, they get a level of cooperation. Various levels of cooperation. I had zero cooperation, so. Just to make it clear, that's why I'm quite pleased that people say the word unofficial. He hasn't told me he's read it, but people close to him have told me that he has, and have actually told me that they've spoken to him about it. So he's aware of it. And interestingly, a couple of months ago, in the court case where he's now on trial for corruption, for bribery and fraud. In his testimony, he actually mentioned something I wrote in my book. So he brought that as something to his, in his defense. So if he decided to quote from the book, I can only assume that he's read it.
So let's start basically with October 7th, because I think a lot of people are relatively familiar with Netanyahu's history before that, but it's the really contemporary period that we want to dive into. A lot of the Israeli friends I spoke to in the aftermath of that said this has been the worst security disaster for Israel since its foundation. Netanyahu absolutely won't survive this politically. He's already got this corruption case against him. Then there's this judicial overhaul that he tried to do, which triggered a huge wave of protests. And then in the middle of that, October 7th happens, and a lot of Israelis I spoke to, but again, I guess my friends are more the liberal side of society, so probably not representative of the voting electorate as you were. But a lot of people I spoke to were insistent that Netanyahu was basically finished, and that as soon as whatever military action that followed October 7th was over, that his time would basically end in office. It's been a long time since then now. The war has continued ongoing in Gaza, but also there have been other wars here and there that seem to be conveniently timed for Netanyahu when he is running out of road on one way or another. So what is Netanyahu's position now? Like 2 years on almost from October 7th, is he looking like he has managed to dig himself out of a hole politically?
No, I don't think so. I think that what Netanyahu has done is he has held on for the duration of his term, and his term still has another year and a bit until the next elections are held in Israel. They have to be held at the latest in October 2026. As far as the Israeli public is concerned, he's totally lost the confidence of the majority of Israelis. Ever since October 7, there's been a majority of Israelis who said that he has to go. Some said he has to go immediately. Some said, well, as soon as the war ends. But I think there's a very clear majority, around 2/3 of Israelis, who are saying that, sometimes even more. And we're also seeing in the polls, in the result, in the election, if elections were held now, that the parties in his camp would lose a chunk of their seats and wouldn't have a majority if elections were to be held. And this has been consistent in the last 22 months since October 7. And people said after the war with Iran or after the war with Hezbollah, now he's going to make a comeback. Now he's going to show, people are going to be happy with him for what seemed successful and short and effective wars against Hezbollah first, and then against Iran. And there was a little bump, but not much more than that. And he hasn't regained standing that he had before. Is a clear majority of Israelis who want him to leave. That said, the fact that 2/3 of Israelis want Netanyahu to leave is meaningless until they get an opportunity. And since it's a parliamentary system, the parliament has to, as long as the parliament is in term, there has to be a majority of the Israeli parliament. And coalition is there are a lot of dissatisfied, mainly because it's
I've lost you there, Anshel. Sorry, I've lost you completely there, Anshel. Do you want to log out? I mean, refresh, because I've just it's just hung on one thing, and I can't hear anything, unfortunately. Oh, there you are. You're back.
Excuse me?
Yeah, you're back. Sorry, there's just a bit of a lag. It seems to have improved now. So the question I guess I've got next is...
just to finish the thought.
Yeah.
So as long as his coalition hold on, and as long as they're still with him, as long as they have these chunks of power that they don't want to give up, then he's in office as well.
Okay, so I mean, we've had a little bit of lag, but it seemed to work out fine. So if it happens again, we'll just wait it out. So the question I've got leading on from that is, can you talk to us about the corruption probes and the investigations that he's facing? How long do you think he can feasibly keep kicking the can down the road? How, I mean, obviously you can't predict the outcome of a court case, but this seems like a very, very serious issue. But I don't know the specific ins and outs of it, and how he has been doing so far with trying to deal with those cases. So can you talk to us about the domestic corruption scandal surrounding him and how that's starting to impact what looks like what's left of his tenure?
So the cases in which he's already on trial, and he has been on trial now for 4 years, are mainly to do with influence peddling and for receiving illegal gifts. So there's the case in which there's what's called Case 1000, in which he's accused of receiving tens of thousands of dollars worth of gifts, Cuban cigars, French champagne, Italian suits from a number of business people who may have got favors, but even if they didn't get favors in return, that these are illegal because he's not allowed to receive them. This is a breach of trust case. Then there's another case in which he's accused of engaging in some kind of a plot with the owner of one of the biggest newspapers in Israel, in return for some kind of he was going to do favors to that media baron in return for he would help him out with another media baron. There was it was a case in which basically they were engaged in dealings which would probably be illegal, another breach of trust case. And then the third case, which is the biggie, and that's the bribery case, in which yet another media baron and Netanyahu are accused of having a deal in which he would arrange various changes in media laws and regulations in return for preferential coverage in that media baron's website, which was one of the most popular news websites in Israel. So those are the three cases which have been kind of put into one charge sheet, and that's what he's been on trial for. It's going very slowly because he's the prime minister, and he can use that as a way to try and get out of as many sessions as he can. The judges have been, I think, remarkably easy on him in that sense, and it's just been dragging on for a long time. There's arguments over, I'm not going to go into the argument between the lawyers over how well some of the charges are holding up. I think some of them are and some of them are less. That's still happening, and it's a crazy situation in which a prime minister of a country at war is sometimes twice a week, even 3 times a week, that usually not, appearing in court as well. So that's a bizarre thing. And then there are ongoing investigations, and just the latest of them is an investigation against some of his most senior advisors in his office, who apparently, while they were working in the prime minister's office, were also influence peddling for the Qatari government. That's the alleged claim. And at least one of them was also somehow obtaining illegally and leaking secret information from within the Israeli army. So far, Netanyahu is not known to be a suspect in any of these cases, but it's basically his most senior aides and some of what they were doing, according to the leaks from the case, allegedly they were doing with his knowledge, or leaking stuff to favor the coverage of Netanyahu. So these are issues which could very well come back to haunt him. But he's, in all the cases against him, he's on the same line. This is something that has been cooked up. This is a witch hunt. This is all bullshit. This is something that the left wingers in the prosecutor's office and the media have all cooked up against me, and it just shows how much they hate me and how much what they're willing to do to try and bring me down. But the people have voted me in, and therefore this will all blow over and be seen to be nothing.
So that's the domestic situation. He's unpopular. He looks like he's heading for electoral defeat the next time there's going to be general elections held in Israel. He is basically running out of road and running out of time in delaying this case against him, which seems to be mounting new charges tacked on here and there, as you said, more allegations surrounding him and his cronies, shall we say. What about the international pressure? The moves from the United Kingdom and France to recognize a Palestinian state, that's going to be a significant political blow for him on the international diplomatic front. But also, you've got these very serious arrest warrants against him from the ICJ, or is it the ICC? Sorry. The IC, yeah. So those are going to hamper his ability to travel. I mean, he can still go to the United States of America, but going to countries that have independent police forces that are signed up to the Rome Statute, it will be very difficult for him to even visit those countries now going forward. So how is that international pressure on Netanyahu building? What are the sort of specific points you think are more impactful than others? And yeah, talk to me about the international front on Netanyahu now.
Well, I'm not sure that I agree that the recognition of a Palestinian state by Britain and France, if it does happen next month, is such a huge thing. I mean, it's not going to make a Palestinian state happen. It's not going to bring about a mechanism for that state to come into existence. Now, I want that to happen. I want it to be a Palestinian state. I think that would be the best solution for which would I think stabilize the region and help Israel. But Netanyahu doesn't think that, and most Israelis don't think that right now. And let's be honest, the Palestinians aren't it right now in a state to found their own state. They're still divided and weak, and the Palestinian Authority isn't yet up to snuff on that. So I don't think that this recognition, even though it's being seen as some kind of diplomatic blow to Israel, I don't think that this is as much as people are making out of it. And I think likewise the ICC, yes, it's a bummer for Netanyahu that he can't go to many countries, and since those arrest warrants have been there, he's gone 3 times to the United States and once to Hungary. So that's those are countries where he can go and without fear of arrest. But it's not. He's a jet setter. He likes to travel as much as possible on the Israeli taxpayer. His wife likes to join him on these flights. Before the war, he was every few weeks in another country. But beyond the fact that he can't travel to where he wants, the fact that he can almost drop in on Donald Trump whenever he wants is a compensation for him. And the Americans don't seem to be listening to the ICC. They themselves aren't signed up to the Rome Statute. And Netanyahu's been 3 times to Washington since Donald Trump has elected. So that I think he's probably the world leader who's visited Trump the most since Trump's inauguration in January. So I think this has more impact. There's sort of a knock-on impact on Israel in many ways. It's got a knock-on impact on Israeli businesses who are finding it more difficult to do business in many countries, on the Israeli academics who have who have been applying for grants and for fellowships at universities who get turned down. Just Israelis who are traveling around the world and are getting a lot of nasty things said to them. And I mean, I don't see it yet as something which is necessarily going to impact on Netanyahu personally. I don't think we're going to see him hauled to the dock in The Hague anytime soon. But this is part of the siege mentality that he's been building around him in Israel. Even the heads of even the leaders of the Israeli opposition who are against him have to say, well, we're against these ICC warrants, and Israel should not be a subject to the ICC because Israel can hold itself to account. And I don't think it boosts Netanyahu's popularity, but I don't think it's causing him any harm, the fact that the ICC have an arrest warrant against him.
So he's not having as much international pressure necessarily as domestic pressure. There is also the protest movements led particularly you know, you had the judicial anti-judicial overhaul movement, and then you have the families of the hostages who very much want their relatives brought back from captivity. And there is significant pressure within Israeli society building on that front. Netanyahu again seems to be managing to, that tweet that I always think about of it'll be weird, funny to watch. I'd like to see old Donald Trump wriggle out of this one, and then Donald Trump easily wriggles out of the jam. Netanyahu has that bit about him in that even pressure from the families of hostages is something that he is managing to ride out. I suppose, I mean, you've already touched upon it, that it's a parliamentary system, so he's basically there for as long as a parliamentary term does. But we've seen in Britain the kind of turmoil that sort of leaders can go through in parliamentary democracy. So again, that's something that he's managing to ride out with these protests in Tel Aviv, weekly.
Well, there are almost nightly protests, not just in Tel Aviv, but in Jerusalem and in many other cities as well. And this has been a period of almost relentless protests since January 23, when his government rolled out the plans for the judicial overhaul. And then early on in the war, the kind of similar forces coalesced behind the hostages' families to demand that. And so Netanyahu is still in power. The protests haven't toppled him. On the other hand, I think it'd be wrong to say that the protests haven't had an effect. The protests, first of all, in those months before the war, I think managed to block most of the legislation that was planned. They were trying to take over the Supreme Court. They were trying to weaken the Supreme Court in many ways and change some very fundamental things in Israel's constitutional law. A lot of that was blocked, I think, thanks to the protests. And, as you said, in a parliamentary system where Prime Minister can hold on to his coalition, then protests will always be limited in their effort. I think they had a big effect on that. And then I think since the beginning of the war, the fact that the protests of the hostage families and the movement that gathered around them, and the fact that it's constant protest and it's always at the front of the public agenda and of the public's consciousness, has kept that issue on the agenda. It has, I think, had an effect which helped to force Netanyahu to accept the 2 temporary ceasefires in which most of the hostages were released. We're talking of 250 hostages who were captured on October 7th. 50 are still, 50 amongst of whom 20 are assumed to be alive, are still being held in Gaza now for all this time. But 200, most of them emerged alive. And that's thanks, I think, in very large part to this protest, who have been keeping that very much at the front, not just in Israel. They're doing an incredible job of keeping this issue alive on the international scene. And the families have gone to Washington numerous times and to other countries and met with both Biden and now with Trump and other world leaders. So they've kept up this pressure. And Netanyahu, as we've seen, kind of wanted the hostage issue to kind of remain in the background, certainly within Israel, and didn't want it to sort of hamper his war effort. But it was thanks to the protests that the release of the hostages became an official war aim. And what we're seeing right now as we speak, there's an argument going on in the cabinet with some of the ministers and also the chief of staff of the IDF saying to Netanyahu that some of the war plans that he wants now to push in cabinet are endangering the hostages. So I think that is also largely down to the protest. So it certainly hasn't been a failure, but no, it hasn't. You're right. Netanyahu's still in power, and there still are hostages in Gaza. But I think the protesters had huge achievements, especially when the official opposition in the Knesset is so weak and divided. So it's really the unofficial opposition, the opposition on the streets, the protesters for democracy, and the protesters for the hostages, who have achieved most of what has been achieved against the Netanyahu government since since it took office.
So I'm also interested in some of the recent developments. Netanyahu today, as we're recording, saying that Israel isn't interested in annexing the West Bank, even though some of his ministers have been very explicitly saying that this is what they want to do, they intend to do. Netanyahu's government is a coalition government, and he is in coalition with basically outright Kahanists. How is that coalition management impacting things? And the second question I have as well is, off the back of those talking about the protests, it's very common that I hear from talking to Israelis involved in these protests that they believe that Netanyahu is extending the war in Gaza and launching these other attacks here and there across the Middle East because it's buying him time. So that's something I hear. Again, I don't necessarily want to talk about the kind of hearsay of public opinion, but that is a view that's very much I've heard from very serious foreign policy thinkers, both inside Israel and outside Israel. So what I'm curious about is how much of the view inside Israel is that Netanyahu is prolonging the war to keep himself out of prison, or effectively, and how much of that is also being pushed against Netanyahu from the other side, from the Kahanists that make up several senior positions in the Israeli government.
So there's a lot to unpack in that question. Let's talk about Gaza, and then we'll talk about the other wars. I think on the front of Gaza, it's very clear to most Israelis, and Netanyahu's coalition allies aren't hiding it. They want to stay in Gaza in perpetuity. They also explain, obviously, that Israel needs to do that to destroy Hamas and to prevent any other October 7 happening again. That's rather ridiculous because Hamas is a shadow of its former self, and Israel, I think, is much more alert and ready now to prevent something like October 7 happening again. But they are making no attempt to hide that they want to annex Gaza and to rebuild Jewish settlements in Gaza, and to bring about what they call voluntary emigration of the Palestinians from Gaza. That's their clear aspirations, and they've held numerous conferences and events to push that view. Now, Netanyahu, as you mentioned, said today in an interview that that's not his plan. He doesn't want to stay. He wants to occupy Gaza so that they can get rid of Hamas, but he doesn't want to stay there. The problem is that Netanyahu hasn't done anything yet to prevent his allies from, he has done nothing to make them think that they won't achieve their aspirations. Now, they are a minority, both in the Knesset and in the Israeli public, but they're a minority which are holding up Netanyahu's majority. So there is a clear correlation, and we've seen that almost every time that the negotiation.
You cut out sort of. I had a power cut, so I've had to quickly bodge everything together on my computer. So we started again. Sorry. I suppose we need to go back to. We started off. You got halfway through the question. You talked about that Netanyahu hadn't really done anything to pressure against the Kahanists. You said they're a minority, but Netanyahu hasn't really gone any out of his way to make that, say that he doesn't want to go ahead with their aspirations effectively.
So basically, on Gaza, Netanyahu's policy, and it's not a strategy because Netanyahu has yet to present any kind of day after vision of what is the end game in Gaza, what would Gaza look like if once this war is ended, and what he claims will be total victory. But whatever his policy is in Gaza, it always seems to be totally aligned with his political need to keep his far right partners on board. And every time it looks like we've been close to a ceasefire, then those partners kind of put the screws on Netanyahu again, and there's suddenly a reason not to reach a ceasefire. Hamas have also obviously helped him with this, giving plenty of reasons also not to have a ceasefire. But there were enough times when there was a deal on the table, and Netanyahu seemed to find another excuse, another reason. And just incredibly, that also keeps him in, keeps his majority together. So that works together. You mentioned people saying that also the wars in Lebanon with Hezbollah last, the second half of last year, and the war in Iraq with Iran 6 or 7 weeks ago were also politically motivated. Look, everything is politically motivated, but I think that the consensus, I know from everyone I've spoken to, the consensus amongst most Israeli security chiefs is that the circumstances that existed at the point that Israel went to war with Hezbollah and took that opportunity to destroy Hezbollah's long-range missile arsenal, and when Israel decided that Iran was too close for comfort, let's say, to achieving a nuclear capability and long-range, really enlarging its long-range missile arsenal a couple of months ago. Those were decisions that I think that any Israeli prime minister would have made. They're not unique to Netanyahu. Obviously, Netanyahu has his own political motives for taking them, but I've spoken to some of the former Israeli prime ministers. They've all said to me they would have made the same decision. It's not something that you can say only happened because of Netanyahu's political survival needs. And both the intelligence that Israel was holding on Iran that led to the war 2 months ago, I think any Israeli prime minister would have made the same decision. And I think the same was true of that opportunity to take out the Hezbollah leadership and the Hezbollah arsenal. I think any responsible Israeli prime minister, certainly someone looking at Israel's national security needs and doctrines, would have made the same decision as Netanyahu. Obviously, Netanyahu wants people to think that he's the only one who's brave enough to do it. I think that they would have all made the same decision.
So listen, so thanks for everyone for sticking with us, even though I've had a power cut and you can see I've only got battery lights behind me and I'm running off the laptop. So sorry for the things. This is what living in Ukraine is occasionally like. Oh, here we go. I'll stay on this now. But yeah, so look, what the question I have is what does the future hold? Let's say in theory, the war in Gaza doesn't look like it's coming to any kind of conclusion under Netanyahu. Let's say, in theory, hypothetically, we head towards Israeli elections during wartime. Netanyahu gets voted out, as if we believe what the polls are saying. What does the future hold from day one from that new administration? Or I suppose Netanyahu will stay in until a coalition has been formed, right? So what does the future hold from day one of Netanyahu no longer being the prime minister?
Well, let's just say before that happens, there could be a number of off ramps. Netanyahu could be pressured by Donald Trump to accept some kind of a ceasefire. Well, there has been that kind of pressure before. There was pressure to do that in January when in the other big ceasefire, but then after 2 months, Netanyahu managed to weasel out of it. There has been pressure at various points. Netanyahu so far has managed to convince Trump to give him some more some more room for maneuver. So that any moment Trump could decide that's it, and he's putting the screws on Netanyahu, and then Netanyahu will have to find a way to accept a ceasefire. There's also another option. Netanyahu will accept a ceasefire just before the election, because maybe he won't want to go into the election with a war still happening, with hostages still in Gaza, and he'll find the moment to do that when elections are anyway near. There's another concern that the war will continue. Netanyahu will use that as an excuse not to hold elections. I think if that does happen, I think all hell will break loose in Israel, and the protests that you've seen until now, which are unprecedented, will look like child's play to the protests that there'll be if Netanyahu tries to postpone an election. But after saying all that, if there is an election, and assuming Netanyahu won't be able to to form a coalition, someone else will, because it's not necessarily the same thing. Netanyahu will remain prime minister until someone forms a coalition. Now, even if Netanyahu doesn't have a majority anymore after the election, which is quite likely according to almost all the serious polls, someone else managing to bring enough people together from the opposition gathering around someone, all the different parties, and everyone working with each other, including with. We seem to have lost Oz again.
No, we lost you. We're back now. You were talking about,
you hear me?
if he, yeah, I can hear you. He was just saying, he would still be the prime minister, and you'd have to form a coalition against him.
But okay, but assuming that happens, and there is finally a new prime minister in Israel, and the war in Gaza is still happening when the new government is formed, then I think that we know what the deal will look like. There will be some kind of ceasefire agreement. Hamas will accept some kind of role, diminished role in Gaza. There'll be a technocrat government. There'll be attempts to disarm and to demilitarize Gaza. It won't be an easy thing. Hamas will still try and keep a lot of its weapons, and Israel will try and keep some parts of what's called the perimeter of Gaza under its control. There'll be a very uneasy period in which hopefully Gaza will stabilize, and hopefully the Palestinian Authority can come in with the help of Arab countries. It's not going to be easy. Anyone who says that there is a clear way of ending this war and that both sides can accept, and that even before we talk about the mammoth task of rebuilding Gaza, I mean, Gaza, estimated 70% of the buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, and they're just clearing away the rubble and starting to rebuild Gaza is going to be a massive, massive task. And then, what do you do with Hamas meanwhile? They're still there. They still have people. They still have tunnels. There's a vacuum. Who's going to be in charge of security once Hamas melt away back into the tunnels? There isn't currently an alternative force. The Palestinian Authority doesn't have the capacity yet to send thousands of security personnel. Where they're going to come from? Will there be sort of a gangland kind of a situation in Gaza? I mean, there's plenty of arms and plenty of people who know how to use an AK-47. So it's going to be a very difficult twilight period, even when the war is officially over. So to predict how the outcome of that, I think would be very presumptuous.
I meant more necessarily not predicting the outcome of that, but for Netanyahu, with that net tightening around him, particularly with these corruption cases. Once there's a new coalition in place, again, I'm talking in hypotheticals because we don't know for certain what the outcome of that election will be. But is there a very strong chance that we might see Netanyahu in prison?
Well, Israel has sent a former prime minister to prison. Ehud Olmert went to prison for taking bribes, and the wing, they renovated the wing in Masyal prison in central Israel, so that wing could hold the prime minister, because a former prime minister still needs a certain level of security because of all the secrets he holds in his head. So there was like a special wing renovated there. That wing is still there. They've changed the name and the number of the wing kind of to not, so people won't talk about the prime minister's wing in prison, but it could still happen, and Israel has done it before. I personally didn't believe before Olmert went to prison that Israel could send the prime minister to prison, but it did. And very few countries have sent their former prime minister to prison without carrying out a coup or something like that, but just through, in America, when Nixon should have gone to prison, he was pardoned. And the same thing with Donald Trump, who may have done stuff that he should have gone to prison for, but he managed to beat the rap. It'll be much more difficult with Netanyahu, I think. And also, by the time assuming Netanyahu loses an election next year, he'll be 76. There'll still be a lot of people, even though a minority, who are very much for him and will still see him as their leader. He will still claim it's a witch hunt. I think the preference of the legal establishment would not be to go all the way and get a conviction sending into prison, but to get some kind of plea bargain which would end the whole saga, and he would accept some kind of reduced sentence which wouldn't include prison time. But knowing Netanyahu, even if he does lose the next election and if he is forced out of office, he won't see that as an end. He will still try and come back again. And he's come back so many times, and he doesn't have a life outside politics. He doesn't have, he thinks that he should always be Israel's prime minister, and without him, he thinks Israel's lost. He came back 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago, after people thought it wouldn't happen. And even at the age of 76 or older than that, he'll carry on trying. As long as he's relatively healthy, and he's got, his dad lived till 102. He's got good genes. He can continue fighting. That's what he'll do. He'll always have this camp around him who think that he's a victim of terrible media and legal persecution. He'll always be this champion of the angry underdogs who see anyone who's not part of their camp as traitors and the old elites, and they're the real embodiment of the nation. So I think it's much too early to say that Netanyahu's going to go to prison and that's it, or he's just going to go and accept meekly some kind of a plea bargain and go and grow roses or whatever people do when they're. I mean, he's way past retirement age, but he's still nowhere near thinking about that. And he looks at Donald Trump, who's a couple of years older than him, actually maybe more. I think 3 years older than him. And he sees they each see in each other role models as people who never give up, and even after they've lost election and been forced out and they're stuck in court cases, as far as they're concerned, they're still their country's leaders, and they won't give up.
That's been a really fascinating discussion. We've had 2 power cuts here, so I appreciate you sticking with the crazy nature of running a live show from Kyiv.
Okay, I've covered the war in Kyiv as well. I know what it's like, and we all work in these conditions occasionally.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, we had dinner in Kyiv a while ago, so it'd be great to see you again if you're passing through the city at any point.
I mean, I really wish peace on Ukraine, no question about it. But it's obviously always different when you're covering someone else's war and when you're covering a war in your own home country. So let's hope that I'll be able to pass through Kyiv when there's peace, both here in Israel and in Gaza and in Ukraine and also in Russia. It'd be good that for all these wars to end, and you can also go and do new things. But what are you going to do without a war to cover, Oz?
That's the question I've been asking myself. I don't know where I end and the war journalist begins. It's been basically my entire life up to this point. So it's a really good intro. No one really ever asked me questions on the show, Anshel. So you've thrown me for 6 there. I don't know. I have thought about retirement very seriously. There's only so many years in the tank for doing this kind of work, and it's more the case of, again, what would I do outside of this? I'm not quite sure. What people who pivot out of journalism end up pivoting into some kind of conflict-related field anyway. So it's not like it gets you out of the difficult situation. So I don't know, Anshel. What about you? What are you going to do when there's peace finally?
Well, there'll be a big election to cover here, whenever that happens, and then there'll be the post Netanyahu era at some time. So I'll still be covering that, and we'll see.
So I have,
I'm a journalist for life, and I love my job, as frustrating as it often is. I'd be happy to cover for a while another country, another topic, just for variety, I think. But it's too early to start planning that. Sadly, the war here is not over, and this very dark era for Israel is not over. So I'm still stuck covering it.
Yeah, I mean, my father, my parents, my sister's in Syria, my parents are in Lebanon right now. My father's really keen for me to come back home and do some reporting there, but my hands are full here at the moment. Getting away from the Middle East has been the mental break I needed from and reinvigorated my passion for journalism. But again, I feel kind of like you that I'm a journalist for life. I have one final question for you, Anshel. Very quick one. Is there going to be an update to your book? Is there going to be like an addendum, another? There's clearly more chapters to go. So I'm interested if there's going to be the kind of Netanyahu, the prison years added to your book.
No, I did one update to the book, as I said, but I really don't want to go back and start writing another part to that book. That book, I think people still read it, even though it ends in, well, it depends which edition. One it ends in 2018, the other ends in 2020. I still meet a lot of people and get a lot of feedback from people reading the book, and they still think it's worthwhile, even though there are a few years that are not covered there anymore. I'm working now on two new books. One I was working at the beginning of the war, which is called God-Fearers, a journey through Jewish fundamentalism, and that was sort of half written when the war began. And I decided, and my publishers, thankfully, I was fortunate that my publishers agreed that book should be postponed and not be overshadowed by this war. So that book is now on hold, and my deal with them is I'm writing another book about this period. But it's not a story of Netanyahu, because I don't think I know we've spent now nearly an hour talking about Netanyahu. I know he fascinates people. Lots of people are asking me, so when you're bringing out your next Netanyahu book? But this book is not Netanyahu's story, because I think even Netanyahu has been prime minister now. Excuse me. For 2.5 years. I think the perception of many people of this being Netanyahu's war, of this being a war that Netanyahu has led and maneuvered, I think that's wrong. I think a lot of what's happened, I think most of what's happened, most of the most important events since Netanyahu returned to office have been because of Netanyahu's weakness, have been other people acting, other actors, whether it's the radical members of Netanyahu's own government with their agendas, the judicial overhaul, the far right push. These have all been carried out by other people in Netanyahu's cabinet, and Netanyahu has sort of gone along with them. But it's been because he's so weak. It's been because he is beholden to them, and he's sort of been on the ride. And there's a very famous saying which was said about the John Major's government back in the late 90s in Britain. I forgot right now who said it, but he said that John Major was in office but not in power. And I think that's been true of Netanyahu a lot for the last 2.5 years, that he's been the prime minister. He's got up in the morning, he's gone to the prime minister's car, people called him prime minister, and he went to the prime minister's office. But a lot of the power has been given away by him to his political partners and allies. And the other thing is that so many of the events haven't been, first of all, this war was begun. Let's not forget, this war was started by Hamas. This is something that Hamas began, and it landed on Netanyahu. He didn't want it. It's not something that fulfilled any of his purposes. Now he's not ending the war because he's a weak person. He's too weak to end the war because of he's afraid he'll lose his coalition, and he won't take the initiative on anything. But I think what we've seen is, even the wars with Iran and the wars with Hezbollah, in many ways, they were circumstances that happened beyond his power, that he made the decision that any other Israeli prime minister would have made to go to war against Iran and to go to war against Hezbollah. But so much of what has happened has been beyond his power. So that's a long explanation of what my book is going to be about. It's going to be about this period in Israel since Netanyahu's government came into office at the very end of 22. But it's going to be highlighting the fact that a lot of what is happening in Israel is almost anarchy. It's like different ministers are pursuing their own agendas. It's a weak prime minister who can't stop them, who can't control events, who won't make decisions. and so much which is happening has been happening from beyond his control. So that's the next book, that's going to come out before the book which I was working on before the war, and it's going to be called "No King in Israel," which is a quote from the book of Judges in the Old Testament. The verses, in those days there was no king in Israel; each man did as he saw fit. And I think that's, even though that was written 3,000 years ago, I think it's a very good description of the very dystopian situation right now in Israel and Gaza.
Well, thank you so much, Anshel. So you've got the Netanyahu book. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Also, people can find your work at The Economist and Haaretz. Is there anywhere else people can go and find your work online that I should put in the show notes?
Right now, for the last year, I've been a full-time correspondent. Occasionally, I write pieces, and you can find me there.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Again, I wanted to thank you for dealing with all of the technical issues. We'd love to have you back on in the future in a post-Netanyahu world, so we can talk about
next time we meet bakes in Kiev.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go to that restaurant again, the beef one. It was good. All right. Well, thank you so much. Take care. Stay safe, Anshel, and I'll see you soon.
You stay safe as well. Bye.
So that was Anshel Pfeffer, the Economist's Israel correspondent, very educated person, particularly on the subject of Netanyahu. Hopefully we've tried to get to the bottom of what an expert really thinks the future holds for him. Thank you guys for staying with me in a power cut. As you can see, I am on my laptop now. So, I had it by me because I was expecting that at some point this might happen, and luckily, not luckily, but I have managed to hopefully salvage the situation. Trying to get an electrician to come round and look at it. As I said, it's a bit of a nightmare at the moment. Thank you for sticking with my show, which is kind of held together with nuts and bolts at the moment and bits of duct tape and WD-40. But we are slowly driving forward and trying to have interesting discussions while things go pop and bang and all sorts of things happening up in this place. Thank you all for sticking with me. If you enjoy the show, if you want to help out, help me pay for an electrician, please do consider liking and subscribing, following along. If you're following along live on Twitch, thank you, all of my regulars, everyone that's in the message chat group tonight, thank you. If you're following on Twitter or YouTube and you want to interact with the show, Twitch is the way to do it, or you can leave a comment on YouTube below. But please do interact with the accounts in some way. It really does help us grow. As you can see, we are held together with string and bits of tape, and the show is continuing regardless. But I appreciate all of you who stuck with us. A good night, and I will see you next week for another set of shows with some really interesting guests. So thank you all, take care, and have a great night.